Chris de Souza.
Weelkes, Hosanna to the Son of David. Here we go. Basic start. 2, 3, 4. I can hear you. Come to us and pick you up. Pause. All right, get more into the centre of yours now. Pause. Pause.
It's 8 o'clock on a cold, wet winter's morning in the middle of Winchester. 22 young choristers are tuning up, doing their morning exercises under the energetic guidance of the master of the music at Winchester Cathedral, David Hill. And the point of it all? This. Hosanna to the Son of David by Thomas Weelkes, sung by the choir of Winchester Cathedral, directed by David Hill. We're sitting in your sitting room, David, and if ever a commercial was required for the advantages of being cathedral organist, I think this is the location. In a medieval hall, basically, with round Norman pillars and fireplaces that look as though they've been lifted bodily from the cathedral itself. I think a lot of people have this idea of the English cathedral organist as a sort of slightly sedentary gentleman, you know, occasionally bumbling up to the organ loft, playing a few pieces, you know, patting the boys on the head as he goes, and then going off to a wonderful house somewhere in the close. That must be the old-fashioned image of a cathedral organist, because I suspect that the reality is very different.
Yes, it's an interesting job in many ways. I mean, some of those things you've just mentioned perhaps still exist, that of course we do live in these lovely houses, in lovely closes, in lovely cities. I think the job itself now is multifaceted. We have essentially choirs to train. We have organists who generally play the organ.
That's the funny thing, isn't it? The cathedral organist almost never plays the organ, at least in public.
That's right. The only time I really play the organ, and I enjoy playing it immensely, occasionally for services here, but mainly when I give recitals outside, and that's when I find that most of my serious organ playing takes place. But I think the other aspects to the job really are the business of running the show. In other words, as an administrator, you have to be absolutely clued up. And indeed, other things which need to be fitted around the work of the cathedral, maybe choral societies, or indeed other concert making, or recording, or television, or any number of things really, which make up what is a very interesting life.
What is the daily life of the choir?
The daily life of the choir is, in a sense, the very centre of its life, because we have rehearsals every day. Each morning the boys meet to sing for 50 minutes. At 8:10, most people would be perhaps munching something to eat or fighting their way through crowds of people to get to work. And so we are there rehearsing the daily music, and then the boys continue their normal day's school, and then we meet again later on in the day to rehearse the evensong at 5 o'clock. Now, as far as we are concerned, not only is this central to our life, it's actually central to our ability as a group of musicians together, that each day we turn up and we take this whole thing incredibly seriously, so that at 5:30, where there is one person there or there's 1,000, that we present evensong, that lovely office of the Church of England. And it is our job, in a sense, to bring people closer to whichever sort of spirituality they belong to, bringing them closer to that through what we do within that service. And in this superb building, the choir is itself a very committed Christian group who themselves feel very strongly about this. And my own personal feeling is that if we're not committed ourselves, how on earth can we transmit any feeling about the music, or indeed the building and what it offers?
All of which sits a little bit ill, doesn't it, with the way cathedral choirs now have to make their living, by doing foreign tours in secular concert halls, making recordings not necessarily of religious music.
Well, I think that this is an interesting one, whether the actual secular side of the choir, which of course is important, because after all the cathedral choir is funded principally by the Dean and Chapter, and it does cost a considerable amount of money, about £150,000 or £160,000 a year. And the gentlemen of the choir in particular are a very committed set of wonderful singers who don't come here for large amounts of money, I have to say, who come here because they wish to be part of what we can offer. Now, apart from the daily service, which is, as I say, quintessentially what we're here to do, we do have to make sure that the choir, I suppose it is, really. I have our colleague in Canon Job, who's Vice Dean here, is also presenter and head of music, and he's an immensely musical man and a great help to me a lot of the time. But if I was to say that my choice of music is usually never questioned, I hope that's a reflection of the care I do take about making sure that we listen, or people are listening to music of all periods, ranging from Gregorian chant right through to contemporary music, and in most months the music list will reflect that.
And that is an awful lot of music.
It is an immense amount of music, there is no doubt about that.
I mean, each day, how many pieces will you sing?
Well, each day we have to prepare the service, which consists of a set of responses, the psalms of the day, a setting of the Magnificat and Nunc Dimittis, which is the central part of the service, and that can range from being a short Tallis service, say, to the Byrd Great service, or Howells St. Paul service, or whatever. Then we sing an anthem each day, and that again can range from If Ye Love Me by Tallis to Great is the Lord by Elgar, huge psalm setting. And this is those details I gave then, in fact, didn't reflect what we do on Sundays, which again is quite a different thing, when in fact we sing firstly matins on a Sunday morning, which consists of a canticle, it could be a Te Deum by Howells or whatever, and an anthem plus the responses and so on, and then a whole Eucharist setting. So that can be the best part of, say, the coronation mass, as we did last Sunday, and then we have lunch and then come back and then we sing the whole of evensong. So this is a pattern that not only we adopt, of course, but the majority of cathedrals around the country.
You're not bashed by the amount that you have to plan then? I mean, have you got ideas falling off your shelves, or do you have to search around a bit? How do you set about planning these musical days?
I have a pretty good memory, I think, and I enjoy putting out all these months lists on the table and looking through and seeing, oh yes, that piece hasn't been done for a little while and I should reintroduce this and perhaps that ought to go. So I think it's really a jigsaw puzzle which one needs to have plenty of time to put together.
So when was the last time you did the Robert Parsons Ave Maria?
Well, we did the Robert Parsons about 2 months ago.
And the Byrd that we're going to hear?
Rorate Caeli. That's a wonderful work which I came to know when I was organ scholar at St John's, Cambridge, and the George Guest, one of his favourite pieces, and it's just so wonderfully vibrant, and a superb setting of those lovely words, "Drop down, ye heavens from above."
Rorate Caeli by William Byrd and Robert Parsons' Ave Maria. When we began this programme, we heard a little bit of the work of the choir school. We heard you in training. How do you set about training a bunch of boys, and indeed men, to sing music of that complexity? What are you aiming for?
We're aiming really to produce a particular sound which comes together and that everyone produces it in a uniform way.
Now that sound is your taste, isn't it? I mean, it's the way you like to hear it.
It is how I like to hear it, it's true. It's the result really of a number of years of thinking about this, but also, of course, experiencing the sounds of choirs and indeed the ways in which other choir trainers, much better than myself, have actually produced their sounds too. I've been hugely influenced, of course, by the great George Guest at St John's, Cambridge, and also George Malcolm at Westminster Cathedral.
It's very interesting that you've chosen the two men who perhaps went completely against the Anglican tradition.
Yes.
Men who went for the Catholic sound, the continental sound. What is it you like about that particular sound?
Well, I think what comes over to me about this is the individual quality of the sound, the idea that singers should be there to express themselves in a personal way, but within the corporate body of the choir, and that it is the individualism which sparks off the ability for the choir to be able to really communicate. Now, I think that is essentially what's behind both George's, George Guest and George Malcolm's approach. But I think also, if I can add here, what I'm hugely lucky to have is I'm married to a singer who for many years has taught me about how the voice really works. And that's been a huge influence on me personally. And Hilary sees the boys week by week to check if they're absolutely okay vocally. And what has happened really is that we do work together on this, and therefore the boys receive a lot of technical training, but we don't let it get in the way of the other training. And I think that what it does allow them to do is to think very carefully about their voice and therefore their own personal contribution to the choir. Now, this is in a sense different from the choir, which assembles and relies upon a kind of corporate discipline, but not too much individualism, because it might stick out, it may not blend, or whatever the reasons may be given by a particular choir trainer. But it's that, in a sense, the hiding behind the other person approach. And I mean, I'm always rather amused when people say, in a situation like this, where that perhaps there is a choir that coos away quietly by itself, that suddenly a boy emerges with a lovely solo voice, and everyone sort of applauds it and say, "Isn't it wonderful? We've got a lovely solo boy. Isn't it extraordinary?" And almost treat it as a phenomenon. Whereas my own feeling is, well, that's great, because there are probably about half a dozen others like that in the choir if they were given the chance and taught how to produce the best sound they can manage. So I think, without getting too hijacked by technical areas, which we don't do, because, I mean, little children, boys of 7, 8, 9, don't want to be told about the position of the larynx and whether the tongue, what happens to it if it's in the wrong position or so on. They want to be told where to make sure it's going to go, so that the throat remains open. They need to be told even how the voice resonates. But beyond those sorts of things, they don't need to be blinded with this science. And I think that those who criticise the technical approach fail to realise that if, in fact, you ensure these things within little ones, that they understand the importance of all these things early on, you will in fact get so much better results off them, and indeed their voices will remain intact until they are 13 years old. So we have exercises which we use so that they understand how to produce the different vowel sounds in the different areas of their voice, in particular one which automatically induces the dropping of the jaw, which is ka. Now, if we go ah on a high note, of course, it becomes a little strident, a little edgy, and a little throaty, probably. But just by asking them to sing ka, it changes the whole focus of the sound.
Don't overpress the bottom note. Make sure that you feeling that the sound is always in here, in the head. Eh? Tuck in now.
Now, if we sing an exercise ascending on air, as it goes high, you can't keep the same shape air because it comes very, very tight. So what you have to do is still think of an air, but open the mouth and allow the vowel to change slightly, maybe even go towards an R, but still the shape of an air. You know, it's difficult to describe except in sound, so this is what we have to practice.
Slide. Adjust.
You referred just now to discipline. You've been describing, as it were, the personal discipline of a man who's allowed to whom you give space to do his own thing. But what about the discipline, the corporate discipline, the management of the personalities, both of boys and men, and that group of human beings for whom you are personally responsible? That must be a large part of what you do.
Yes, indeed. And I go as far as to say we really don't have any discipline problems at all. I think that we could probably use an analogy here with, say, playing sport. That I think singing or being a musician is to some degree similar. I mean, there is a sense of competitiveness and so on, feeling of perhaps of, dare I say, even rivalry, though we don't worry about that. I mean, we just want to get on with life. But what I'm really aiming at really is that we're teams, just in a way that football teams exist together, and that we have our good moments, we have our slightly difficult ones. We have, though, at the end of it, to play by the rules. And ultimately, I mean, it sounds sort of autocratic, but ultimately there's got to be along the rules that I set, and indeed any choir trainer sets.
I think one of the problems that most football managers have is when their prize players get bought away. Now, you must have a similar problem in that boys move or disappear or men get bought out.
Oh, yes, indeed. We've had a massive transfer, as it were, in recent months. And
what happened?
It was just bad luck. We lost 7 wonderful boys who went off to their next schools. And we also lost 2 tenors and 2 basses who've all gone off to be promoted within their particular areas in their lives. And a sub-organist who's gone off to be, and is presently organist of St Mary's Cathedral, Edinburgh, Timothy Barron Wickfield, and an organ scholar who went off to the Royal Academy of Music. Well, if I was to tell you, it took about an hour and a half to say the goodbyes in terms of speeches and at the dinner and so on, because of the numbers involved. This was quite an extraordinary year.
That's about a third of the choir.
Yes, it was a third of the choir. And we have managed to replace the men, and marvellously too. We've got a lovely team of singers, but finding 4 was not easy at once. And in terms of the boys, well, poor fellows, they were devastated because they really only had 11 left from last year, really. So we had to really start almost from square one. And I'm kind to them when I say that I think it was difficult at first, because if you suddenly lose some of your best players, you've really got to rejig the whole map and see how things are going to work. And this is in the context, if I may say so, of actually doing it each day. I mean, there's no trial and error here. They sort of give us a few days whilst we try this,
you
and
have
then
to be back there at 5 o'clock.
Exactly, and we're doing this constantly. So there is a strain behind that, if I may say, which all cathedral organists have. I mean, this is nothing to do with just Winchester. This is everywhere, and we all hope that, of course, we can minimise the damage, really. And having said that, without sounding complacent, I'm actually delighted by the way they've come on this term, and we're working at it all the time, as they say.
And as you say, it is a job.
Indeed.
Whatever the conditions of the boys that day, they have to be in that cathedral at a given time,
Yes.
with the music as advertised.
Yes.
The sort of music that we're going to hear now, the Howells.
Yes, indeed. The great Magnificat, Collegium, Regale, written for King's College, Cambridge.
My spirit doth rejoice in your thy Saviour.
Bruckner's motet, Tota, pulchra es, and before it, the Magnificat from Herbert Howells' setting of the Evening Canticles for King's College, Cambridge. David Hill conducted the choir of Winchester Cathedral, and the organist was David Dunnett. We've talked a lot to you about your cardinal role in all this, but of course we mustn't forget, as you've mentioned, they are a team. And it'll be very interesting to hear what some of the team members have to say. Andrew Parker, the idea of being a lay clerk in a cathedral seems one of the most blissful ways of spending one's life, but it can't possibly keep body and soul together, whatever it might do for your soul. How do you survive?
Well, a number of lay clerks have in the past been school teachers. I think this is rather less the trend now, as it happens in Winchester, though it may still be the case elsewhere. For myself, I work freelance in two different fields, one of which is academic music, music teaching. The other is, in fact, in the computer industry, where I do a certain amount of computer programming. So my schedule is flexible, and that means that I can come to Winchester at the times that rehearsals are required.
But you can't be unique in this, and I just wonder how common it is among employers to think, well, this is okay, you know, this is something to be expected and to be allowed.
I think it's been much easier for those who have been school teachers. In particular, it has given them the school holidays. There have been a number of people who've taught, for example, at the Pilgrim School, which is the school at which the choristers have received their education, and so obviously this ties in absolutely with what the choir's doing.
Would it be true to say that the tendency is find your cathedral choir first, then get your work, or in your case, I suspect it was the other way round. You had a busy freelance career and you were looking for a cathedral?
Well, I'd been out of singing, I suppose, for a number of years.
You were a chorister yourself?
No. I first came to grips with cathedral music, really, in King's College, Cambridge, where I was a coal scholar under David Weelkes.
400 years ago, 500 years ago, you might have been in a cassock, you would have been one of the clergy, wouldn't you? Would you have been a lay clerk?
No, we had lay vicars here from 1541. There were minor canons. There was a large number of minor canons and lay vicars. In fact, there were, I think I'm right in saying, 12 of each. It seems that the minor canons were expected to have a musical role as well, and indeed, one sees evidence of them actually performing, because one of them certainly played the organ, not perhaps at the early stage, but on and into the 17th century. At the moment, I've been doing some work on the history of the music here, and therefore been looking at the documents.
But you're talking about times past, really. I mean, we are now living in almost the 21st century, when life is of a completely different order. It's much busier, we all travel much farther, we have wider social and professional and work commitments. I still think it must be very, although you don't look remotely unhealthy to me, quite a strain living the late 20th century life and yet trying to keep going here some kind of sense of the medieval, of its orderliness, of its universality.
But that's one of the joys, being able to escape from the 20th century existence into something which is a continuation of the monastic ideal. And after all, it is the repetition of the daily office. I mean, obviously we sing only evensong, gone are the days when the choir was expected also to turn up and sing matins. But it is the monthly repetition of the psalms and things like that which has its own glory. And it provides a space of an hour at the end of a day when you can put aside all those thoughts. The telephone won't ring, you don't have to be disturbed by those 20th century things, and you can concentrate on something which is very different and very worthwhile.
My name is George Wester. I am the head chorister at Winchester Cathedral.
What does being head chorister mean?
Well, basically, at the beginning of every day, after breakfast, I have to get the more junior members of the choir up to our practice room over at Pilgrim School, and I have to warm their voices up, which is important, because you can't sort of sing off a cold voice. And then Mr. Hill comes and he takes the practice. And then in the evening, when we have evensong every day, I have to get them into a crocodile, which is pairs, and walk them over to the cathedral, because our school's about 100 metres away and close. And then I have to supervise them on Sundays and when Mr. Hill isn't here.
So there's quite a lot of administration.
Yeah.
What sort of personal qualities do you think you were chosen for?
Right,
Are you a SWAT?
I don't know. Some people will call me a SWAT. I don't call myself SWAT. I think I was chosen because this makes me sound so modest, but it's usually the top guys who've come up, progressed a lot, and they've tried really hard, and it's the people who generally they've been constantly good throughout the 4 years before they're top in the choir.
So you've been in since the age of 7?
Yes, I came in 7.
Do you know a lot of people who aren't choir boys among your friends?
Oh yes, I mean...
Do you have a lot of non-choir boy friends?
Yes, the school, I mean, there's the choristers who sing at college and the choristers, and the rest of the school, which is about 150, are all commoners.
Do you envy them?
I think sometimes I do. After a long day's work and you come back, you've got to sing evensong. Sometimes you feel, I wish I was going to go and do modelling or something like that. But then again, when I'm growing up, I'll think, wow, I was head chorister.
Will you? Are you sure?
Oh, yeah, I think I will.
But the sort of things that you do here, which are the things that give you most pleasure? That really excite you? How goody is that today?
I think if you have a really good evensong with pieces you like, I mean, I like pieces, but I mean, if you really like them, it can be quite good fun. And short psalms always make people happy.
But what about particular celebrations? Christmas, Easter,
yes, we have
a wedding?
Oh yes, wedding's quite good fun because sometimes we get given things. And at Christmas we have a turkey feast given by the dean. It's really good fun.
St. Joseph's Carol by Richard Lloyd. Now, David, if your Christianity is important to you and what you're doing as a musician is important to that Christianity, then isn't it rather sometimes of concern to you that you become a little bit of a picture postcard?
I think I would always wish to quote a phrase which Cardinal Hume once used, which was this, that nothing was too good for God, and that anything we do which is in his name has to be of the highest order, and that far from being rarefied, doing something which is, as it were, rather odd each day, we are carrying out the monastic wishes of those people many hundreds of years ago who said that a religious service should be sung each day in this cathedral. Now, in this secular, godless society, increasingly so, it's of course hard to support that in many respects. But of course, like a lot of the great things, we are looking at something which is quintessentially spiritual. And I think that the way in which music is going in terms of the church leads me to believe that it's all in very good shape in many ways. I think cathedrals are having a renaissance of interest in terms of their music. Church music, or sacred music, call it what you will, is in fact receiving a fantastic amount of public interest, firstly. Secondly, I think that the other area of church music which one might describe as popularist, i.e. with guitars and more, as it were, pop-type music, one should not pour scorn on, because that in its own way is providing a particular message for a particular part of our society who wish that to be their vehicle for communication or spirituality or whatever. And that also is in increasingly better shape than some of the groups that I've heard recently, and indeed involved myself with once in terms of songs of praise here, I was enormously impressed with. And I think that these strands of the church, quite apart from people sort of saying, well, perhaps we should split this and split that in the Church of England, and perhaps even the music should be split down the line, where that you simply allow the good music to be done in church and the pop music to be disallowed, is a load of nonsense, because in fact these things can work together perfectly well.
It's probably in the sphere of Christmas music that the traditional and the popular mix more successfully. Here we are in the middle of the Christmas period. What have you got?
Well, we've got a very, very busy time ahead. Some would say that no Christmas is...
Oh, In Tuning Up, Christèmas Souza talked to David Hill, Master of Music at Winchester Cathedral, and to members of the Cathedral Choir. The accompaniments were played by the Cathedral sub-organist, David Dunnett, and Tuning Up was produced by Michael Emery.